I never thought this would happen to me. You hear about it, of course. People talk. But when it's your life, your home, your marriage, it's a completely different story. I always considered myself a strong woman. A woman who could read people, sense things before they even happened. I thought I had a solid marriage. James and I were married for 5 years, and in that time, we built a life together. It wasn't perfect, but we had our moments, our beautiful moments, the kind you think will last forever. I met James when I was still in college. He was older than me, successful, charismatic, and ambitious. There was something about him that drew me in. At first, I thought it was his confidence, but then I realized it was his kindness, his genuine attention to me. He made me feel special, and I loved that feeling. We dated for a few years before we decided to get married, and even then, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. But in hindsight, I see how naive I was. I see the cracks that I was too blind to notice. When we got married, we decided to hire a maid to help around the house. I wanted things to run smoothly. I was busy with my own career, and James often worked long hours. Clara, the woman we hired, seemed perfect for the job. She was quiet, reserved, and always professional. She was in her late 20s, much younger than I was, and she had the kind of presence that made her fit seamlessly into our home. At first, I barely noticed her. She did her work, I did mine, and life went on. But then something shifted. Slowly, over the years, Clara became more than just a maid. She became a fixture in our home. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, she was around all the time, and James and I trusted her. But I began to notice things I had overlooked before. The subtle glances she exchanged with James, the way she seemed to linger in rooms a bit longer than necessary. At first, I chalked it up to nothing, but a small voice in the back of my head kept nagging me. It was probably nothing, I reassured myself. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had taken the day off from work, planning to run some errands and get a little rest. James had been working late the night before, and I knew he'd be home soon. It was a rare occasion that I had the house to myself. I didn't think anything would be different that day. When I arrived home, I noticed something strange. The house was unusually quiet, which wasn't normal. James was usually home by now, or at least I expected to hear him talking on the phone or busying himself in the study. But the silence was almost suffocating. I took off my shoes at the door and placed my bag down in the entryway, walking through the house toward the kitchen. The faint sound of voices, almost like whispers, drifted to my ears from down the hallway. It was odd. My first thought was that it was probably James on a call, but the sound didn't seem right. It was intimate, low, and breathless. I stopped in my tracks. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to turn around and walk away, but something told me I needed to know. I took a few cautious steps forward, following the sound that seemed to draw me in like a magnet. The hallway was dimly lit by the late afternoon sun, casting shadows across the floor, as though the house itself was hiding something from me. When I reached the guest bedroom, I froze. Through the slightly ajar door, I could see them. James and Clara were standing in the middle of the room. His hands were tangled in her hair, pulling her close. She was pressed against him, her arms wrapped around his neck, and their lips were locked in an intense kiss. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I didn't understand what I was seeing. My mind raced, but I couldn't process it. It was too surreal, too impossible. I felt a knot twist in my stomach. The world around me seemed to slow down, each moment stretching into an eternity. The way James held her, the way Clara responded, it was raw, intimate. Everything I had believed about my marriage, about my life, was suddenly crumbling before me. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, to confront them right then and there, but I couldn't find my voice. I was frozen, unable to move, trapped by the truth I had been avoiding. The sound of their kiss filled the room, and I knew I was no longer a part of their world. It felt as if I were an intruder in my own home. But then Clara pulled away slightly, her eyes meeting James's. It was in that moment, in that fleeting glance, that I knew they both knew I was standing there. My heart pounded in my chest, and suddenly, everything shattered. "Amelia," James's voice broke the silence, and I could hear the guilt and panic in his tone. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. "Don't," I whispered, though I wasn't sure I could form coherent words. "Don't say anything." I turned and fled from the room, feeling the weight of their stares follow me. My legs shook as I stumbled down the hallway, away from the betrayal, away from the truth I wasn't ready to face that night. Everything changed. James tried to apologize, tried to explain, but it felt like words were nothing more than empty air. Clara, too, came to me with tearful eyes, offering apologies that felt rehearsed, meaningless. They both said it was a mistake, but the truth was clear. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. They had crossed a line, and I didn't know how to rebuild what had been destroyed. I stayed in the house that night, not because I didn't want to leave, but because I didn't know where to go. I couldn't leave, at least not yet. I needed answers, and I needed time. The next morning, everything was still. The house felt like a stranger to me. James was distant, trying to approach me, to speak to me, but I couldn't bring myself to look him in the eye. He had shattered my trust, and I wasn't sure I could ever piece it back together. And Clara, well, I didn't know what to think about her anymore. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had let into my home, had betrayed me in the most intimate way that I wasn't sure what the future held. What I did know was that nothing would ever be the same. The walls of my home had witnessed something I could never forget. The night passed like a blur, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts and emotions. James tried to speak to me, but his words felt empty. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. All I could see were the images from the guest bedroom, burned into my mind. The kiss, the stolen moments of intimacy between him and Clara. The maid I had trusted, the woman I had welcomed into our lives, had betrayed me in the most intimate way. But as the days went by, I realized something else. It wasn't just that she had betrayed me. Clara wasn't the only one to blame. I had to confront the reality of the situation. My marriage, my trust in James, my relationship with Clara. They had all been built on a foundation that I had failed to see was already cracking, but I couldn't escape the questions that haunted me. How long had this been going on? Was it just that one time, or had they been hiding their affair behind my back for months? Or maybe even years? And what about Clara? Did she feel no shame in betraying the very woman who had given her a safe place in her life? What kind of person does that? I knew I needed to act. I couldn't just sit there, silently bearing the weight of this betrayal. But I also knew that exposing Clara in a way that would destroy her life was not what I wanted. What had happened was a violation of trust, but what came next was about more than revenge. It was about learning from this situation and ensuring that others wouldn't fall into the same trap that I began to quietly investigate. I had to understand everything. I had to find out how deep this had really gone. One night, when James was out of town for a business trip, I took it upon myself to search through Clara's belongings. I had never snooped before. She had always been so respectful and professional. But in the aftermath of betrayal, I found myself doing things I never thought I would. What I found shocked me. Hidden in the bottom drawer of Clara's dresser were a series of letters. Letters from James. Love letters. They weren't just notes or casual messages. They were heartfelt, intimate confessions of love. Some of them dated back to the very first year we hired Clara. The letters revealed how their relationship had started, how it had grown over time, and how they had become entwined in a way I couldn't fathom. They had lied to me for so long, right under my nose. The betrayal was worse than I had imagined. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was an affair that had been ongoing for years. I felt sick to my stomach. How had I not noticed? Was I so blinded by my own life, by my own distractions, that I allowed them to manipulate me so easily? Had I been so busy with my career, so caught up in trusting the people around me, that I failed to see what was right in front of me? But amidst the anger and hurt, a strange clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my marriage falling apart or my betrayal. It was about the larger message, the lesson I had to learn and share with others. Women like Clara, men like James, they aren't just victims in a love triangle. They're playing dangerous games, and they hurt people in ways they might never fully understand. That I decided that I couldn't just let this situation go. I couldn't allow Clara to continue manipulating her way through life, hurting other women along the way. And I couldn't let James continue as if nothing had happened. But I didn't want to hurt them in a way that would destroy their lives. I wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions, and I needed to ensure that others learned from my experience. I confronted Clara. I didn't yell, I didn't scream. Instead, I sat her down in the very room where it all began. The guest bedroom, where James and I had once planned our lives together. Clara sat across from me, her face pale, her hands trembling. "You've hurt me, Clara. You've betrayed my trust in a way I never imagined," I said softly. "But this is about more than just me. This is about accountability. And you need to understand that what you've done has consequences. It's not just my marriage that's broken. It's your life that's now filled with lies." Clara looked down, ashamed, but I could see the guilt and the regret in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I never meant to hurt you." But her apology meant nothing now. It wasn't enough. She could apologize 1,000 times, but it wouldn't take away the years of deceit, the broken trust, and the damage done. "What you did was more than just a mistake," I continued, my voice firm. "This isn't something you can just apologize for and move on from. People need to understand what happens when you let secrets fester, when you let betrayal go unchecked. What happened between you and James is wrong, and people need to be aware of how easy it is to be deceived." I gave her a choice: leave the house, or I would expose everything. She left that night, and I never heard from her again. When James returned from his business trip, there was no warm greeting, no attempt at apology. I had already made up my mind. I had no intention of just sitting back and letting him slip away from this without facing real consequences. But I needed him to feel what I had felt: the betrayal, the confusion, the hurt. I needed him to understand the depth of the pain his actions had caused, and I wasn't going to be satisfied with anything less than his full acknowledgement of what he had done. had planned the conversation for days. There would be no anger, no shouting. Those were the emotions of the week. I had to be in control. When James walked through the door, I was sitting in the living room, my hands folded neatly in my lap. He looked at me, expecting the same old routine. Some small talk, a dinner, maybe an apology that would patch things up. But I wasn't the same woman he had married. I stood up slowly, my eyes steady, unflinching. I could see the uncertainty on his face as he saw the coldness in my expression. "We need to talk," I said simply. My voice was calm, controlled. Everything he knew was about to change. "I'm sorry, Emily," James started, taking a step toward me. "I never meant for this to happen. I don't know what got into me, but it was a mistake. A huge mistake, and I'm truly sorry." I didn't flinch, didn't allow myself to be swayed by his empty words. "A mistake?" I asked quietly. "James, it was never a mistake. It was a choice. You chose Clara. You chose betrayal. You chose deceit. And now, you will face the consequences of your actions." I watched as he tried to speak, but I held up my hand. "No. You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to take back what you've done. You don't get to keep playing the victim here." He was quiet now, visibly uncomfortable, knowing that the gravity of the situation had finally hit him. But I wasn't finished. This was just the beginning. For the next week, I said nothing. I didn't shout at him. I didn't cry. I didn't even show the slightest sign of weakness. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to back down. James began to feel the tension. He tried to initiate conversations, tried to win me over with apologies, but I remained silent. Each moment of silence was a punishment in itself. But it wasn't just about emotional punishment. No, I had bigger plans. This betrayal wasn't going to just pass by unnoticed. I was going to make sure he understood how it felt to lose everything, to lose his reputation, his standing, and his sense of control. I contacted a lawyer, but I didn't file for divorce immediately. No, I had something more powerful in mind. I began gathering evidence. Everything I could find on Clara's involvement, James' communications, the affair itself. I knew how this world worked, how people like him protected themselves with wealth and status. I wasn't going to give him the chance to lie his way out of this. He was going to face the full consequences, and I was going to make sure that his career, his reputation, everything he'd worked for would be on the line. But it wasn't just about destroying him. It was about making sure this didn't happen again. I had to ensure that he would never betray me or anyone else in the future. 2 weeks after the confrontation, I made my move. I called James into the study and sat across from him, my demeanor still cool and collected. This time, he could sense something different in the air, a sense of finality. He knew the game was up. "James," I began, my voice steady, "I've been thinking about everything you've done. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. And I've decided that it's time to end this marriage. But not in the way you think." I paused, allowing the weight of my words to settle in. He looked at me, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. "You see," I continued, "I've been documenting everything. All the evidence. Your messages, the photos, the letters from Clara. Everything. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows. I'm going to make sure the people who have respected you, trusted you, understand exactly who you are. I'm going to make sure your business partners, your friends, And everyone you've ever worked with knows what kind of man you truly are." James looked horrified, but I wasn't finished. "You've been living in a world where you think your mistakes have no consequences. But I'm going to change that. I'll send everything to the media, to your colleagues. I'll make sure they understand exactly how far you've fallen." He tried to protest, tried to beg, but I remained silent, watching him squirm. "And Clara," I added, "she'll be dealt with too. She's not going to walk away from this scot-free. I've already made sure she knows her options. I'm giving her one last chance to walk away quietly. If she doesn't, the same consequences await her." He sank into the chair, defeated. His life was unraveling in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I had made sure of that, James, and I went through the formalities of divorce, but it wasn't just a personal separation. It was a complete unraveling of his life as he knew it. His reputation was shattered, his business partners distanced themselves from him, and his image as the charming, successful man was destroyed in the blink of an eye. The world learned the truth about him, about his affair, about his lies, about the man he truly was. As for Clara, she left the city. Her career, her personal life, everything she had built was destroyed in the wake of the scandal. The shame was too much for her to bear. In the end, I walked away from this marriage with my dignity intact. I had taken control, used strategy and silence to show both James and Clara the depth of my power. And I had ensured that they would never forget the consequences of their actions. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about empowerment. It was about making sure they learned that no one gets away with betraying someone who trusted them. And in the end, I knew that they would never make the same mistake again, because they had seen just how far I would go to ensure that justice was done.